leave a comment with your city name, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
The crystalline walls of the Galactic War Council. Chamber hummed with barely contained energy as Commander Zexthil stepped forward, his forearms gesturing with mechanical precision. The Stratocracy's greatest military mind had summoned representatives from across the galaxy for this emergency session, and the gravity of the situation hung in the air like a death sentence. Esteemed colleagues, Zexthil began, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had never lost a battle through emotion. We face an unprecedented crisis. The hegemony has broken through our outer defenses at 17 critical points. Their coordinated assault has cost us 47 worlds in the past lunar cycle alone. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled beings. The hegemony, a collective consciousness that had consumed entire star systems with methodical efficiency, represented the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Their perfect coordination and emotionless tactical execution had proven nearly impossible to counter. Our response must be equally coordinated, Zexthil continued, his reptilian eyes scanning the chamber with clinical detachment. This is why I have called you here. We need unity of command, precision of execution, and absolute logical consistency in our strategic response. Ambassador Krelinak of the Thermic Confederation leaned forward, her crystalline form refracting the chambers. Light into prismatic patterns. What of the humans? Their military forces have been requesting inclusion in strategic planning for months. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Zexthil's mandibles clicked in what could only be described as disdain. The humans, he said, the words dripping with contempt, are emotionally compromised. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They become angry in battle. They form attachments to their soldiers. They take unnecessary risks to save individuals rather than preserve the mission. In warfare, emotion is a liability. It clouds judgment, creates unpredictability, and leads to tactical errors that cost lives. Senator Vexmuth of the Arachnid Collective nodded in agreement, her 8 eyes focusing on Zexthil with approval. The humans' emotional responses are well documented. They cry when their comrades die. They become enraged when they perceive injustice. They make sacrificial plays based on concepts like honor and loyalty rather than strategic value. Such behavior has no place in modern warfare. Precisely, Zexthil replied. The hegemony succeeds because they have eliminated emotion from their tactical calculations. They are a perfect collective intelligence, making optimal decisions based purely on logical analysis. To defeat them, we must be equally logical, equally emotionless. This is why human participation in strategic planning is not just inadvisable, it is catastrophic. The assembled representatives murmured their agreement. The logic was sound, the reasoning clear. Emotion had no place in warfare against a perfectly logical enemy. They were about to learn how fatally wrong they were. 3 sectors away, Colonel Sarah Martinez stood in the cramped quarters of the Human Military Transport Resilience, studying tactical displays that painted a picture of unmitigated disaster. At 38, she had spent her entire adult life in military service, rising through the ranks not through political connections, but through an uncanny ability to read battlefields in ways that confounded her superiors. Ma'am, Lieutenant. Commander Davis approached, his face grave. Latest reports from the front. The Stratocracy lost 3 entire fleets at Proxima Reach. The hegemony is advancing on 15 fronts simultaneously. Sarah's jaw tightened as she absorbed the information. For months, she had watched the galactic military leadership make the same mistakes repeatedly, treating the hegemony like a conventional enemy that could be defeated through standard tactical doctrine. They approached each battle with textbook Precision, following established protocols, making decisions based on probability matrices and strategic algorithms, and they were losing, badly. "Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly, "have you ever been in a bar fight?" Davis blinked, clearly, not expecting the question. "Ma'am? A real bar fight. Not a sparring match, not a training exercise. An actual fight where someone wanted to hurt you, where logic went out the window and it came down to who wanted to win more." "Yes, ma'am, once in college." "Did you win?" "Yes, ma'am." "How?" Davis thought for a moment. I got angry." "Really?" "Angry. The other guy was bigger, stronger, better trained. But I was furious about something he'd said about my sister. I stopped thinking about technique and just fought. Dirty, desperate, emotional. I won because I wanted it more than he did." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's what the stratocracy doesn't understand. They think emotion makes you weak, but emotion is what makes you dangerous. It's what makes you unpredictable. It's what makes you fight harder than logic says you should." She turned back to the tactical display, studying the hegemony's advance patterns. "Look at this. Every single battle, they respond to our moves with perfect logical counters. They analyze our formations, calculate our probable responses, and position themselves accordingly. They're not fighting us, they're solving us, like a mathematical equation." "What do you mean, ma'am?" "The hegemony is a hive mind. They think in terms of optimal solutions, perfect coordination, logical progression. But humans Humans are chaos. We make decisions based on gut feelings. We take risks that don't make sense on paper. We fight for things that have no tactical value. We're everything they can't calculate." Davis looked skeptical. "Ma'am, with respect, that sounds like you're saying our weaknesses are actually strengths." "I'm saying that what the stratocracy considers weaknesses might be exactly what we need to win this war. The hegemony has never faced an enemy that fights based on emotion rather than logic. They don't know how to respond to tactics that don't make sense." Before Davis could respond, the CUM system crackled to life. "Colonel Martinez, please report to the Communication Center. Priority message from Galactic Command." Sarah exchanged a glance with Davis. Messages from Galactic Command were rare. Humans were typically excluded from strategic communications. She made her way to the CUM Center, where a three-dimensional hologram of Commander Zexthil flickered to life. "Colonel Martinez," the alien commander began without preamble, "the War Council has reviewed your repeated requests for strategic inclusion. While we maintain that human emotional responses are incompatible with effective warfare, our current situation has become challenging." Sarah bit back her immediate response. After months of being dismissed as too emotional for war, they were finally willing to listen. "Sort of. We are prepared to offer you a limited advisory role," Zexthil continued. "You will provide tactical recommendations for consideration by the Strategic Planning Committee. Your suggestions will be evaluated for logical merit before implementation." "What kind of advisory role, Commander?" "You will analyze hegemony tactical patterns and suggest countermeasures. However, let me be clear. Any recommendations based on emotional reasoning rather than logical analysis will be rejected. We need strategic thinking, not human feelings." Sarah felt a familiar surge of anger at the dismissive tone, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was her chance to prove that everything the stratocracy believed about human emotion was wrong. "Understood. Commander, I'll need access to all tactical data from the past 6 months, including detailed analysis of failed operations." "Granted. Report to Strategic Command in 48 hours. And Colonel, remember that lives depend on logical decision-making, not emotional impulses." As the hologram faded, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. The Stratocracy thought they were offering her a chance to prove human logic could match their own. They had no idea she was about to prove that human emotion was the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. The Strategic Command Center on Nexus Prime was a marvel of technological precision. Holographic displays showed real-time tactical data from holographic displays showed real-time tactical data from tactical data from Omna. Across the galaxy, while AI systems processed probability matrices and strategic algorithms with mechanical efficiency. It was the perfect environment for logical warfare. Sarah felt completely out of place, which was exactly how she knew she was in the right position to make a difference. Colonel Martinez, Zexthur's aide, an insectoid being named Hickstar, approached with undisguised skepticism. The commander has assigned you to Analysis Station 7. You will review tactical data and submit recommendations through the appropriate channels. Sarah nodded, settling into the designated workstation. Around her, alien strategists worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and calculated. She pulled up the tactical data from the past 6 months and began her analysis. The pattern was immediately obvious to her, though she suspected the Stratocracy's logical approach had blinded them to it. The hegemony didn't just respond to their tactics, they anticipated them. Every strategic move followed such rigid, logical progressions that the enemy could predict their responses with mathematical precision. Fascinating, she muttered, scrolling through battle reports. They're not just fighting us. They're solving us like a puzzle. Is there a problem, Colonel? Hickstar's voice carried a note of suspicion. No problem, Sarah replied. Just confirming what I suspected. The hegemony's tactical responses show they're treating our forces like a deterministic system. They input our formations and equipment, run probability calculations, and output perfect counters. That is correct. They are highly logical opponents. Too logical, Sarah said quietly. They're assuming we'll always make the optimal tactical decision. But what if we don't? Hickstar's compound eyes glittered with confusion. Why would we make suboptimal decisions? Because sometimes the suboptimal decision is the right one. Sarah spent the next 3 days diving deep into the tactical data, mapping not just what the hegemony did but how they thought. Their responses were so precisely calculated that she began to see the mathematical models underlying their strategy. They were treating warfare like a chess game with perfect information, where every move had a logically optimal counter. Human warfare wasn't chess. It was poker, a game of incomplete information, bluffing, and psychological pressure. A game where the best move wasn't always the logical one. I need to speak with Commander Zexthul, she announced on her 4th day. The commander is in strategic planning session, Hickstar replied dismissively. Submit your recommendations through proper channels. This can't wait. I've found something. What? Sarah pulled up a 3-dimensional tactical display showing the hegemony's last major victory. They're not just predictable, they're programmable. Look at this response pattern. Every time our forces take position A, they respond with maneuver B. Every time we deploy formation C, they counter with formation D. They're not adapting to our tactics, they're running a program. Hickstar leaned closer, studying the display. You're suggesting they're automated? I'm suggesting they're too logical. They've eliminated the human element from their warfare, which makes them incredibly efficient but also incredibly predictable. They can't handle truly irrational behavior because they don't have the emotional context to understand it. This is why emotion is a liability in warfare, Hickstar said firmly. Irrational behavior leads to tactical disasters. Does it? Sarah pulled up another display. Look at this battle from the archives, the siege of Kepler Station. Human forces were outnumbered 3-1, logically outmatched, and facing certain defeat. Standard tactical doctrine called for retreat to preserve forces. Yes, I'm familiar with this engagement. The humans made an irrational decision to continue fighting, and they won. Not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through sheer emotional determination. They fought harder than logic said they should, took risks that didn't make sense, and achieved victory through what the stratocracy would call emotional compromise. Hickstar's mandibles clicked in agitation. One example does not prove a pattern. You're right. One example doesn't prove a pattern, but 50 examples might. Sarah had spent her time in the archives compiling a comprehensive analysis of human military victories throughout galactic history. In every case, the key to victory had been what other species considered humanity's greatest weakness: their emotional responses. I need 15 minutes with the Strategic Planning Committee, she said. I can show them how to beat the hegemony. Through emotional reasoning? Through emotional warfare. The Strategic Planning Committee received Sarah's presentation with the kind of polite skepticism reserved for obviously insane proposals. Representatives from a dozen species listened as she explained her theory that the hegemony's greatest strength, their logical perfection, was also their greatest vulnerability. Let me understand your proposal, Commander Zexthul said slowly. You want us to make deliberately irrational tactical decisions. I want us to make emotionally driven decisions that appear irrational but serve strategic purposes, Sarah corrected. The hegemony predicts our responses based on logical analysis. They can't predict emotional responses because they don't understand them. Emotion leads to tactical errors, Senator Vexmuth interjected. This is established military doctrine. Established doctrine is getting us killed, Sarah replied bluntly. We've lost 47 worlds following established doctrine. Maybe it's time to try something different, such as? Sarah activated a holographic display showing the current front lines. Operation Heartstring. We have a small engagement scheduled at the Theta Eridani system. Low stakes, minimal forces involved. Let me design a tactical approach based on emotional rather than logical considerations. What would such an approach entail? Unpredictability. Taking risks that don't make sense on paper. Fighting for objectives that have no logical value. Making decisions based on instinct rather than analysis. The committee exchanged glances. The proposal violated every principle of modern military strategy. The risk is too great, Zexthul decided. If you're emotional, tactics fail, we lose valuable forces. If your logical tactics continue, we lose the war, Sarah countered. Give me one battle. One chance to prove that human emotion is a weapon, not a weakness. The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Ambassador Krellenak spoke up. The Theta Eridani engagement is already considered a likely loss. Our tactical analysis shows a 68% probability of defeat using standard approaches. Meaning we have little to lose by trying something different, Sarah pressed. Zexthul's forearms moved in a complex pattern that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. Very well. You will have operational command of the Theta Eridani engagement. But Colonel, if your emotional tactics result in unnecessary casualties, you will be held responsible. Understood, Commander. But when they work, I want full strategic integration for human forces. When they work, you will have earned it. The Theta Eridani system was a strategic backwater. 3 rocky planets orbiting a dim red star with minimal resources and no significant tactical value. Under normal circumstances, the engagement would have been a textbook operation. Establish orbital superiority, secure the primary planet, and set up defensive positions. Sarah through the textbook. Out the airlock. All units, "This is Colonel Martinez," she announced over the fleet-wide comm system. "We're going to do something that will probably sound insane. I need you to trust me and follow orders exactly, even when they don't make sense." She commanded a mixed force of human and alien vessels, 12 ships total, facing a hegemony. Fleet of 8 larger, more heavily armed vessels. By logical analysis, her forces were outmatched. By emotional analysis, the hegemony had no idea what they were about to face. "Admiral Tkex," she addressed the Thermic Confederation commander, "I need you to take your squadron and attack the hegemony flagship directly. Full frontal assault, no tactical subtlety." "Colonel, that is suicide. Their flagship outguns my entire squadron." "I know. Do it anyway. And make sure you're angry when you do it." "Angry? Furious. I want you to attack like they just insulted your mother. Forget tactical doctrine, forget calculated risks. Just hit them with everything you've got." Tkex's confusion was palpable over the comm. "This violates every principle of, trust me, get angry and attack." Sarah turned to the human vessels. "Captain Rodriguez, take the Indomitable and the Perseverance and do something completely insane. I want you to ram the hegemony cruiser." "Ma'am?" "Not actually ram it, but get close enough that they think you're going to ram it. Close enough that it scares them. Close enough that any logical analysis would conclude you've lost your mind." "Colonel, I'm not sure I understand." "You don't need to understand. You just need to feel it. What makes you angry about the hegemony? What pisses you off about what they've done to our people?" There was a pause, then Rodriguez's voice came back harder. "They killed my brother at Proxima Reach. Good, use that. Let that anger drive your attack. Don't think about optimal firing solutions or tactical positioning. Just hurt them like they hurt you." As the battle began, Sarah watched the hegemony's response patterns with intense focus. Their formations were perfect, their tactical responses precise and calculated. They countered Tkex's frontal assault with a textbook defensive maneuver, redirecting firepower to create optimal crossfire patterns. But something was wrong. Their responses were slightly delayed, their formations minutely less precise. The hegemony fleet was reacting to emotional attacks with logical responses, but the emotional attacks weren't following the patterns they expected. "They're confused," Sarah muttered, studying the tactical display. "They're trying to solve us, but we're not being logical enough to solve." "Colonel," Tkex's voice crackled with strain, "my squadron is taking heavy damage. Request permission to withdraw." "Negative. Get angrier. Fight like they just declared war on everything you love. This is madness. This is war, real war, not some computer simulation." Sarah watched as Tkex's squadron abandoned all pretense of tactical formation and began attacking with desperate fury. Their movements became unpredictable, their targeting priorities apparently random. The hegemony fleet's responses grew increasingly erratic as they struggled to counter tactics that made no logical sense. "Captain Rodriguez, begin your ramming. Run. Full acceleration, straight at their cruiser." "Ma'am, if we actually hit them, we won't." "But they don't know that. They're going to analyze the probability that we're actually insane enough to ram them, and they're going to conclude it's high enough to worry about." The Indomitable and Perseverance accelerated toward the hegemony cruiser at maximum burn. There. Approach vectors clearly indicating a collision course. Sarah watched the enemy ship's response with grim satisfaction. They were moving to avoid the collision, breaking formation and disrupting their own tactical positioning. All units, Phase 2. Attack their broken formation with everything you've got. But I want you to fight angry. Fight like you mean it. Fight like this is personal. What followed was unlike any battle in galactic military history. Human and alien forces attacked with emotional fury rather than tactical precision, their movements driven by anger, determination, and sheer bloody-mindedness. They took risks that violated every principle of sound military strategy, and they won. The hegemony fleet, faced with opponents who refused to behave logically, found their perfect coordination falling apart. Their tactical responses became increasingly desperate as they struggled to counter attacks that made no mathematical sense. One by one, their ships fell to enemies who fought with heart rather than head. All enemy vessels destroyed or retreating, Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with amazement. "Colonel, how did you know that would work?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because I understood something the stratocracy doesn't. Emotion isn't a weakness in warfare, it's a force multiplier. When you fight with passion, you fight harder than logic says you should. When you fight with anger, you take risks that turn probable defeats into impossible victories. But how did you know the hegemony couldn't handle it? Because they're too logical. They've eliminated emotion from their tactical calculations, which means they can't understand or predict emotional responses. They can solve logical problems, but they can't solve the human heart. Hey there, incredible humans. I know we're getting to the good part, but if this story is giving you chills about the power of human emotion, you absolutely have to smash that like button and let me know in the comments which moment made you proud to be human. Trust me, we're just getting started. The victory at Theta Eridani sent shockwaves through the galactic military establishment. A minor engagement that was expected to be a routine loss had become a stunning victory through tactics that violated every principle of modern warfare. The strategic implications were staggering. Commander Zexthol summoned Sarah to his private briefing room aboard the flagship Logical Imperative, his forearms moving in patterns that suggested deep contemplation, mixed with profound unease. "Colonel Martinez," he began without preamble, "your tactical approach at Theta Eridani has raised ... questions." "Questions about what, Commander?" "About the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Your forces achieved victory through what can only be described as controlled irrationality. This challenges core assumptions about military strategy that have guided galactic civilization for millennia." Sarah leaned forward. Maybe those assumptions needed to be challenged. Perhaps. But the implications are ... disturbing. If emotional responses are indeed tactically superior to logical ones, then everything we thought we knew about warfare is wrong. Not wrong, incomplete. Logic is important. You need it for planning, resource allocation, strategic thinking. But logic alone isn't enough. You need emotion to provide the drive, the unpredictability, the willingness to take risks that logic would reject. Zexthel's reptilian eyes studied her with newfound respect. Your species has been fighting emotional wars for millennia. You have experience with this form of combat that we lack. We have experience with fighting for things that matter more than logic. That's what emotion does. It makes you fight harder for things that have no tactical value but enormous personal importance. Such as honor, loyalty, love, revenge, the desire to protect people who can't protect themselves, the need to prove that the underdog can win. Sarah paused. The hegemony doesn't understand any of those concepts. They're alien to their thinking. And
you believe this emotional approach can be replicated?
That other species can learn to fight with feelings? I believe that everyone fights harder when they're fighting for something they care about. The trick is teaching them to care about the right things. Zexthol was quiet for a long moment. The War Council has voted to expand your role. You will be given command of a task force to test emotional warfare tactics on a larger scale. However, there are conditions. What conditions? You will be paired with logical advisors to ensure that emotional decisions don't compromise strategic objectives. You will be required to justify your tactical choices through post-battle analysis, and you will be held responsible for any failures that result from emotional errors. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. But I want human officers integrated into command positions across the fleet. You can't fight emotional wars with purely logical commanders. Agreed. But remember, Colonel, we are trusting you with lives, many lives. If your emotional warfare proves to be a liability rather than an asset, it won't be. But, Commander, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about tactical innovation. The hegemony represents everything that's wrong with pure logic and warfare. They've eliminated the human element, literally. They fight wars without passion, without caring about the cost. That's not strength. That's emptiness. And you believe passion makes warriors stronger? I believe that warriors who fight for something they love are harder to defeat than warriors who fight because an algorithm tells them to. The expansion of human involvement in galactic military operations proceeded with careful deliberation. Sarah found herself assigned to a task force of 15 ships, with mixed crews representing 8 different species. Her mission was to test emotional warfare tactics on a larger scale while training alien officers in human-style combat psychology. The challenges were immediate and significant. Most alien species had evolved beyond what they considered primitive emotional responses. The stratocracy valued logical analysis above all else. The Thermic Confederation prized calculated efficiency. The Arachnid Collective functioned through hive mind coordination that eliminated individual emotional responses. This is impossible, complained Commander Vexenol of the Stratocracy during their first training session. You're asking us to ignore millions of years of evolution that developed our logical capabilities. I'm asking you to remember that evolution also gave you emotions for a reason, Sarah replied. Fear keeps you alive. Anger gives you strength. Love makes you fight harder. These aren't weaknesses, they're survival mechanisms. Emotion leads to poor decision-making, Vexenol insisted. This is established science. Established science is getting us killed by the hegemony. Maybe it's time to try something different. Sarah had developed a training program that forced alien officers to confront their emotional responses rather than suppress them. She created scenarios where logical responses would fail, situations where survival depended on irrational decision-making. Lieutenant Hickstar, she called during a simulation exercise, your squadron is outnumbered 3-1. Logical analysis indicates you should retreat to preserve forces, but your retreat will expose the civilian evacuation ships to attack. What do you do? The insectoid officer's mandibles clicked in distress. The logical choice is to preserve my forces for future operations. But the civilians will die. And how does that make you feel? It makes me. Hickstar struggled with concepts his species had trained themselves to suppress. It makes me angry, frustrated. I want to protect them. Good. Use that anger. Let it drive your decision-making. What does your anger tell you to do? Fight, even if it's hopeless. Even if I lose my entire squadron. And if you fight with that anger, how do you fight? Harder, faster, more aggressively. Exactly. That's emotional warfare. You're not fighting because tactical analysis indicates optimal probability of success. You're fighting because something inside you demands it. The training exercises grew more complex and emotionally challenging. Sarah forced her officers to confront scenarios where pure logic would fail, where survival depended on emotional responses that defied tactical doctrine. Commander T-Kex of the Thermic Confederation began to show remarkable aptitude for emotional tactics. "Colonel," he reported after a particularly challenging exercise, "I'm beginning to understand your approach. When I fight logically, I calculate optimal outcomes. When I fight emotionally, I create outcomes that shouldn't be possible." "Explain." "Logic tells me what I can do. Emotion tells me what I must do." "The must is more powerful than the can." Sarah nodded approvingly. "You're learning. The hegemony understands can perfectly. They've calculated every possible tactical response based on logical analysis. But they don't understand must. They don't understand fighting for something that matters more than victory." "What matters more than victory?" "The reason you're fighting in the first place." The first major test of expanded emotional warfare came at the Battle of Kepler's Edge, where a hegemony fleet was advancing on a critical supply hub, Sarah's task. Force was assigned to delay the enemy advance while evacuation operations were completed. On paper, it was a hopeless mission. The hegemony fleet consisted of 23 vessels, including 3 massive dreadnoughts that outgunned Sarah's entire force. Logical analysis indicated that her ships could delay the enemy advance for perhaps 20 minutes before being overwhelmed. "All ships, this is Colonel Martinez," she announced over the fleet-wide comm. "We're about to face impossible odds. Logic says we can't win. Logic says we should retreat. Logic says we're about to die." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Logic is wrong. We're not here to win through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. We're here to buy time for those evacuation ships. Every minute we hold this line is another 1,000 civilians who make it to safety. Every ship we lose is a price we pay. For lives that matter." "Colonel," Commander Vexenol's voice carried a note of concern, "our tactical analysis indicates." "Forget tactical analysis. This isn't about analysis. This is about choice. We can choose to fight logically and lose quickly. Or we can choose to fight emotionally and lose slowly. The slower we lose, the more lives we save. But if we fight emotionally, we fight harder than logic says we should. We take risks that don't make sense. We refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is inevitable." The battle began with the hegemony fleet advancing in perfect formation, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. Sarah's ships met them with formations that seemed almost random, their attack patterns apparently chaotic. "All units, attack pattern Alpha emotional," Sarah commanded. "Target their flagship. Full frontal assault. Make them think we're insane. Colonel, that's suicide. That's passion. Attack like you mean it. Attack like this is personal." The human vessels led the charge, their movements driven by anger and determination rather than tactical calculation. They flew straight at the hegemony flagship, weapons blazing, apparently oblivious to the concentrated fire that should have destroyed them. But something remarkable happened. The other ships in the task force began to follow their lead. TK's squadron abandoned their careful formations and attacked with desperate fury. Vexenol's ships took risks that violated every principle of stratocracy military doctrine. "They're fighting like humans," Sarah murmured, watching the tactical display with pride. The hegemony fleet, faced with opponents who refused to behave logically, began to show signs of confusion. Their perfect coordination started to break down as they struggled to respond to attacks that made no tactical sense. "Enemy flagship is breaking formation," reported Lieutenant Commander Davis. "They're moving to avoid collision with our attack squadrons. All units, exploit the gap. Attack their broken formation with everything you've got. Fight like you're defending your home." The battle raged for 47 minutes, more than twice the projected duration. Sarah's ships fought with emotional fury, taking impossible risks and achieving improbable victories. They lost 8 vessels, but the evacuation was completed successfully. More importantly, they had proven that emotional warfare could be scaled up to major engagements. Colonel Martinez, Zexthil's voice crackled over the comm as the surviving ships regrouped. Your tactical approach has once again exceeded all projections. How do you explain these results? Simple, Commander. When you fight for something, that matters more than your own survival. You fight harder than survival instincts would normally allow. The hegemony can calculate optimal responses to survival-based tactics, but they can't calculate responses to tactics based on sacrifice. Sacrifice? Fighting for something bigger than yourself. The evacuation ships, the civilians, the principle. That some things are worth dying for. The hegemony doesn't understand sacrifice because they've eliminated the emotional context that makes sacrifice meaningful. And you believe this emotional approach can be applied to larger operations? I believe it's the only approach that can win this war. The success at Kepler's Edge convinced even the most skeptical members of the war council that emotional warfare represented a fundamental breakthrough in military strategy. Sarah found herself promoted to admiral and given command of an entire sector with authorization to implement emotional warfare tactics on a massive scale. Admiral Martinez, Commander Zexthil addressed her in their latest strategic briefing. The hegemony has begun to adapt their tactics in response to our emotional warfare. They're attempting to incorporate unpredictability into their strategic calculations. How so? They're using probability matrices to account for irrational behavior. They're assigning mathematical values to emotional responses. They're trying to solve us. Sarah studied the tactical reports with growing concern. The hegemony's latest engagements showed increasingly sophisticated responses to emotional tactics. They were learning to counter unpredictability with calculated randomness. They're making the same mistake the stratocracy made, she realized. They're trying to understand emotion through logic. Is that not possible? Not really. You can study emotion, you can analyze it, you can even simulate it, but you can't truly understand it without feeling it. And the hegemony has eliminated feeling from their existence. Then how do we maintain our tactical advantage? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the star charts and battle reports. We go deeper. We don't just fight with emotion, we fight with the kind of emotions the hegemony can't even comprehend. Such as love, sacrifice, the willingness to die for something greater than yourself. The hegemony can calculate responses to anger, fear, even hatred. But they can't calculate responses to genuine love. How does love factor into military strategy? Love is what makes you fight harder for other people than you would for yourself. It's what makes you take risks that have no logical justification. It's what makes you refuse to surrender even when surrender is the only rational choice. Sarah pulled up a galactic map showing the current front lines. The hegemony is advancing on 3 major population centers. If we approach this logically, we'll fight to preserve military assets and maintain strategic positions. If we approach this emotionally, we'll fight to protect the people we love. And the difference? When you fight to preserve military assets, you make calculated trades. When you fight to protect people you love, you make impossible stands. Operation Heartbreak was Sarah's masterpiece of emotional warfare. Rather than engaging the hegemony fleet in conventional battle, she designed a campaign that would force them to confront the full spectrum of human emotional response. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. 3 hegemony fleets were converging on the heavily populated Centauri system, home to 12 billion sentient beings. Rather than meeting them at the system's edge with conventional defensive lines, Sarah positioned her forces throughout the system, using the civilian population as both motivation and tactical advantage. Admiral, Commander Vexenol protested during the planning session. You're proposing to fight the battle inside the system itself. The civilian casualties could be enormous. The civilian casualties will be zero, Sarah replied firmly. Because we're going to fight like their lives depend on it. Because they do. She activated a holographic display showing the Centauri system in 3 dimensions. Look at this tactically. The hegemony expects us to meet them at the system's edge, where they can use their superior numbers and coordination to overwhelm us. But what if we don't fight where they expect us to? You want to fight among the civilian populations? I want to fight for the civilian populations. There's a difference. Sarah's plan was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, she dispersed her forces throughout the system, positioning them near civilian installations, refugee convoys, and evacuation sites. When the hegemony forces arrived, they would find not a conventional enemy fleet but a defensive network, motivated by the most powerful emotion of all, the desperate need to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Admiral Tikex, she addressed the Thermic Confederation commander. I want your squadron positioned near the civilian evacuation routes from New Geneva. Your job isn't to destroy enemy ships. Your job is to make sure every single evacuation transport makes it to safety. And if the hegemony forces are too strong, then you fight harder. You fight like those are your children on those transports. But they're not my children. They are now. That's what love does. It makes everyone family. The emotional preparation was as important as the tactical preparation. Sarah spent hours with her commanders, helping them understand that this battle would be won not through superior firepower but through superior caring. Commander Hickstar, she called to the insectoid officer who had shown such promise in training. Your people evolved beyond individual emotional attachments in favor of collective logic. But I need you to remember what it felt like to care about someone more than yourself. I'm not sure I understand. Before your species achieved collective consciousness, you must have had individual relationships. Parents, siblings, offspring. Remember what it felt like to want to protect them. Hickstar's mandibles clicked rapidly. That was millions of years ago. We evolved beyond such primitive, such powerful emotions. The hegemony has made the same mistake. They think evolving beyond emotion makes them stronger. But emotion is what makes the impossible possible. The battle began when the first hegemony ships entered the Centauri system. Sarah watched from the bridge of her flagship as the enemy forces advanced in perfect formation, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. All units, this is Admiral Martinez, she announced over the fleet-wide comm. The hegemony has come to destroy 12 billion innocent lives. They think we'll fight them like soldiers following orders. They're wrong. We're going to fight them like parents protecting children. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the system, ships that had been positioned near civilian installations began moving to intercept the hegemony advance. But their movements weren't driven by tactical calculations. They were driven by raw protective instinct. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Davis reported, Captain Rodriguez is requesting permission to ram the hegemony cruiser that's targeting the New Geneva evacuation convoy. Denied. Tell him to fight smarter, not harder. Use his anger, but don't waste his life. Sarah watched the tactical display as the battle unfolded. The hegemony forces, accustomed to facing opponents who fought for tactical advantage, found themselves facing opponents who fought for love. The difference was profound. They're not retreating, she observed with growing excitement. Look at Tikex's squadron. They're outnumbered 4-1, but they're holding position because they're protecting the evacuation transports. Admiral, Zexthul's voice crackled over the comm. Our tactical analysis indicates that several of our units are taking unacceptable losses. to protect tactically insignificant targets. Those targets aren't tactically insignificant. They're emotionally essential, and that's what the hegemony doesn't understand. As the battle progressed, Sarah began to see the pattern she had hoped for. The hegemony forces were winning individual engagements, but they were losing the war. Their perfect coordination was being disrupted by enemies who refused to behave logically. They're trying to calculate our responses, she realized, studying the enemy movement patterns. But they can't calculate love. They can't predict how hard someone will fight to protect something they care about. The turning point came when the hegemony flagship moved to attack the civilian refugee center on Centauri Prime. It was a logical target. Destroying it would eliminate a major population center and demonstrate the futility of resistance. They hadn't counted on the response. All units, priority target, Sarah commanded. Enemy flagship is targeting the refugee center. Every ship, every weapon, everything we've got. The response was instantaneous. Ships from across the system converged on the hegemony flagship, their crews fighting with desperate fury. They abandoned their assigned positions, ignored tactical priorities, and threw themselves at the enemy with suicidal determination. "Admiral, we're leaving other sectors undefended," Vexenol reported. "Good. Let them see what happens when they threaten our people." The assault on the hegemony flagship was unlike anything in galactic military history. 47 ships from 8 different species attacked with coordinated fury, their movements driven not by tactical doctrine, but by protective rage. They fought like they were defending their own families, because, in a way, they were, the flagship's defenses designed to counter logical attacks, couldn't handle the emotional assault. The ship's AI systems, programmed to predict optimal tactical responses, found themselves facing responses that had no logical basis. "They're breaking formation," Davis reported with amazement. "The entire hegemony fleet is falling back." "They don't understand what they're fighting," Sarah said quietly. "They can calculate responses to tactical moves, but they can't calculate responses to love." As the hegemony forces retreated, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. They had proven that emotional warfare could work on the largest scale. More importantly, they had shown that love was indeed the most powerful force in the galaxy. "Admiral Martinez," Zexthiel's voice carried a note of awe. "Your forces have achieved the impossible. The hegemony has never retreated from a battle. They should have won. They retreated because they finally encountered something they couldn't solve," Sarah replied. "They can't solve the human heart." The victory at Centauri sent shockwaves through both the Galactic Alliance and the hegemony. For the first time in the war, a major hegemony offensive had been turned back not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through emotional warfare. The strategic implications were staggering. Sarah found herself summoned to an Entente emergency session of the War Council, where representatives from across the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened. "Admiral Martinez," Commander Zexthal began, his forearms moving in patterns that suggested profound contemplation. "Your victory at Centauri has forced us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself." "What assumptions?" "Commander, that emotion is a liability in combat. That logical analysis produces optimal tactical outcomes. That advanced civilizations fight more effectively than primitive ones." Sarah leaned forward. "And what have you concluded?" "That we were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The hegemony has been defeating us because they outlogic us. But they can't outfeel us. They can't match the emotional intensity that drives truly desperate combat." "It's not just emotional intensity," Sarah corrected. "It's emotional purpose. We don't fight harder because we're more emotional. We fight harder because we're fighting for something we love. Explain the difference. Anger makes you fight harder. Fear makes you fight faster. But love makes you fight longer. Love makes you refuse to surrender even when surrender is the only logical choice. The War Council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Ambassador Krelinak was the first to speak. You're saying that the key to defeating the hegemony isn't superior technology or tactical innovation. It's superior caring. I'm saying that warriors who fight for love are harder to defeat than warriors who fight because a computer tells them to. But how do we weaponize love? Senator Vexmuth asked. How do we teach entire fleets to fight with that kind of emotional commitment? Sarah smiled. You don't teach it, you feel it. And the easiest way to feel it is to have something worth fighting for. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with the War Council to develop a comprehensive emotional warfare doctrine. The principles were simple but revolutionary. First, give every warrior something personal to fight for. Not abstract concepts like galactic security or strategic objectives, but specific people, places, and values that mattered to them individually. Second, position forces not just for tactical advantage, but for emotional resonance. Put defenders where they could see what they were protecting. Put attackers where they could feel the cost of failure. Third, embrace unpredictability as a strategic asset. The hegemony could counter logical tactics, but they couldn't counter emotional responses that defied logical analysis. The most important principle, Sarah explained to the assembled commanders, is that emotional warfare isn't about being more emotional than your enemy. It's about being more human. What if the enemy isn't human? Asked Commander Hickstar. Then you teach them to be human. You show them what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. The transformation of galactic military doctrine proceeded with remarkable speed. Species that had spent millennia suppressing their emotional responses began rediscovering the power of feeling. The Stratocracy developed new training programs that emphasized emotional intelligence alongside tactical analysis. The Thermic Confederation began assigning military units to protect specific civilian populations, creating personal investment in mission success. Most remarkably, the various species began learning from each other's emotional responses. The Arachnid Collective's hive mind connectivity allowed them to share protective instincts across entire fleets. The Stratocracy's logical nature helped them channel emotion into precise tactical applications. We're not just changing how we fight, Sarah observed during a strategy session. We're changing what we fight for. And the hegemony? Zexthul asked. How do they respond to this doctrinal evolution? They're trying to adapt. They're running calculations on emotional responses, attempting to predict irrational behavior through logical analysis. But they're missing the point, which is, emotion isn't irrational, it's super-rational. It operates on principles that transcend logical analysis. The hegemony can study our emotional responses, but they can't replicate them because they've eliminated the emotional context that makes them meaningful. The final test came 6 months later when the hegemony launched their largest offensive of the war. 300 ships, organized into the most powerful fleet in galactic history, advanced on the core worlds with the intent of ending the conflict through overwhelming force. Sarah met them with a fleet half their size, composed of ships from 12 different species united by a single emotional principle. They were fighting for home. The Battle of Soul, fought in humanity's birth system, became the defining engagement of the war. The hegemony forces advanced with perfect coordination, their movements calculated to achieve optimal tactical outcomes. Sarah's forces met them with formations that seemed almost chaotic, their attack patterns driven by protective fury rather than tactical doctrine. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ship after ship fell on both sides, but the emotional warriors of the Galactic Alliance fought with a desperation that the hegemony couldn't match. They took impossible risks, made incredible sacrifices, and achieved victories that defied logical analysis. In the end, the hegemony fleet was broken not by superior firepower, but by superior caring. Their perfect coordination crumbled under the assault of warriors who fought for love rather than logic. Admiral Martinez, the hegemony's surrender message was delivered through quantum transmission. We do not understand your tactical approach. Your forces should not have been able to achieve victory. Our mathematical models indicate that our defeat was statistically impossible. Sarah's response was broadcast across the galaxy. You lost because you forgot what you were fighting for. We won because we remembered what we were fighting for. The war ended not with the destruction of the hegemony, but with their transformation. Faced with the undeniable evidence that emotional warfare was superior to purely logical combat, the collective consciousness began to evolve. Individual personalities began to emerge within the hive mind, each bringing their own emotional perspectives to the collective. It's remarkable, Sarah observed during the peace negotiations. They're not just accepting defeat, they're embracing the principles that defeated them. They're learning to feel, Zexthiel agreed. Individual members of the collective are developing personal attachments, emotional responses, the capacity for love and sacrifice, which makes them more dangerous as potential enemies, but also more valuable as potential allies. The transformation of galactic civilization was profound and permanent. The War Council was restructured to include emotional intelligence as a core requirement for military leadership. Training programs were developed to help various species understand and harness their emotional responses. Most importantly, the principle of fighting for love rather than logic became the foundation of a new military doctrine. Admiral Martinez, Commander Zexthiel addressed Sarah at the victory celebration. Your species has given the galaxy something we didn't know we were missing. What's that? The understanding that strength comes not from the absence of emotion, but from the proper application of it. You've shown us that warriors who fight for love are more powerful than warriors who fight for logic. Sarah looked out at the assembled representatives, beings from dozens of species who had learned to fight with their hearts as well as their minds. We didn't just win a war, we rediscovered what it means to be alive. And the hegemony? They're learning too. Give them time, and they'll discover that individual consciousness isn't a weakness. It's a strength. That caring about specific people and places and values makes you fight harder, not weaker. The final ceremony was held on Earth, in the same system where the decisive battle had been fought. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered to witness the signing of the Treaty of Emotional Warfare, a document that formally recognized the strategic value of fighting for love. Today, Sarah addressed the assembly, we celebrate not just the end of a war, but the beginning of a new understanding. For too long, we believed that emotion was the enemy of effective warfare. We thought that to fight well, we had to eliminate feeling from our tactical calculations. She paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces that had learned to fight with human hearts. We were wrong. Emotion isn't the enemy of warfare, it's the soul of it. When you fight for something you love, you fight harder than logic says you should. When you fight for people you care about, you achieve victories that should be impossible. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah wasn't finished. The hegemony called us primitive because we fought with our hearts. They thought emotion made us weak. Today, we prove them fatally wrong. We proved that the most advanced civilization in the galaxy isn't the one that eliminates emotion, it's the one that harnesses it. As the ceremony concluded and the representatives returned to their worlds, Sarah stood alone on the observation deck of the treaty station, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was at peace, but more importantly, it was at peace for the right reasons. Admiral, Commander Zexthul joined her at the viewport. What happens now? Now we remember what we learned. That emotion isn't a weakness to be overcome. It's a strength to be celebrated. That fighting for love isn't primitive. It's the most advanced form of warfare possible. And if we face new threats, Sarah smiled, then we'll face them together. And we'll win because we'll be fighting for something worth fighting for. As the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Humanity had been dismissed as too emotional for war, but they had proven that emotion was the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. They had shown that love was stronger than logic, that caring was more effective than calculation, that the heart was more powerful than the mind. They had proved the doubters fatally wrong. Hey there, incredible warriors. If this story about the power of human emotion in warfare didn't give you chills, I don't know what will. This proves something amazing about our species. We don't just fight to win, we fight for what we love. And that makes us the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Think about it. Every great human victory in history has been powered by emotion. Love for family, love for freedom, love for justice. The aliens thought this made us weak, but it's actually our greatest strength. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me about a time when fighting for something you loved made you stronger than logic said you should be. And absolutely smash that like button if you're proud that humans are the species that fights with our hearts. I've got another mind-blowing story coming up about what happens when aliens try to understand human pack bonding instincts and accidentally create the most loyal army in galactic history. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe should fear the power of human love. Until next time, remember, when you fight for something you love, you're not just fighting for victory. You're fighting for the soul of what makes us human. And that's a power no computer can calculate, no logic can counter, and no enemy can defeat. See you in the next one, emotional warriors.